How is the regulatory environment for online gaming evolving in Africa?
My name is Joseph, and I'm going to be the moderator for today. Unfortunately, I can't be with you because I'm currently at our firm's office in Dubai. But I hope that I will be with you in the coming years. Without further ado, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, good morning. Is it still morning? Yes, it is. Morning, everyone. My name is Arnold Karanja. I'm a lawyer practicing here in Nairobi. I also do a bit of work in other regions, Uganda, Tanzania. We've been doing this for the past 7 years. I'm a partner in a firm called Mwenja and Karanja Company Advocates. My partner was here earlier on, but he has left. And it's good to be here. Pleasure meeting the new chair, the new board. I can see my senior, Mr. Muganda. Great seeing you here. And of course, the director, Mr. Mbugi. So thank you again.
Hi, Joseph. You can't see me, but it's Aideen. I'm joining this panel. I'm waving at a screen like an idiot. Nice to chat to you again. I know WH. We worked together back in Malta quite a bit. Cameron, Cameron is unable to join. He's dealing with an e-visa issue. I think I've learned more about e-visas in the last 24 hours than I ever needed to know. So Cameron will be here he will be here during the next few days once he sorts that out. But for the moment, Joseph, it is myself and Arnold, and we will get back to you. And we're following on very, very closely to what Tony and I discussed, which is, what's the regulatory environment for online gaming? How is it evolving? So we touched on that in the last session, but I think we can go into more. You're far more qualified than me in this, so I think we can go into much more than this. Okay, Joseph, you're up.
So I prepared some questions over the past few days. I could see you for a moment, but unfortunately now the connection is off, so bear with me. It's a bit difficult to communicate with you without seeing you. But my first question is, we have been talking about Africa as the holy grail for gaming and betting companies for the past 2-3 years, if not more. Very few European companies, however, have managed to enter the market successfully. Is Africa still worth investing in?
My response is an emphatic yes. Africa is still an attractive market, and that's why we are seeing many of these big global brands venturing into various markets in Africa. And in this instance, I'd want us to look at a few countries and not Africa in general, and I'll say why. For example, I'll start here home. It's been compared to 2015 and now 2023. It is easier to penetrate. I'm not saying this because the board is here. At least you write letters and they're responded to. Same thing has happened in Uganda, Tanzania. So the regulators are a bit more approachable and responsive based on my experience. Of course, there are other issues that these companies face that do not necessarily involve the initial stages. So there's companies the foreign companies, the European and the American companies trying to venture into Africa, they've actually had issues when it comes to now when they start the operations. I don't know if they do their research properly, issues to do with compliance, taxation, whereby they're getting maybe new investors, they fail to inform the regulators. So those are some of the issues. But in terms of the companies that did it right, got it right the first time, they are still making money here in Africa.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like we've got a lot of considerations to take into, and one of the things right now is that for companies that have licenses outside of Africa, the first thing you are asked is, have you been in breach of any regulations, or have you fallen foul of anything anywhere in the world? And if you do, your license is compromised and can be suspended or reneged by another authority.
So
That's quite draconian, if I may, because obviously there is no operator that does not commit errors. And as we know nowadays with European regulators in particular, whenever you commit an error, you have to pay for it, and sanctions are given. That doesn't mean that you are an operator that is a bad player, but rather it's part of life. You get penalties constantly, just like when you're driving. It's very easy to get a contravention. It doesn't mean that you're a bad driver or that you don't follow the laws, but once in a while you can slip up. And so is that so tough, or maybe it's just an impression that I got?
So what I've learned from experience is, so for example, there are these forms that you have to sign when making the application, and you actually have to swear that one of the directors or whoever is responsible is supposed to swear, indicating that the information that they've provided is true to their knowledge. So what we have advised our clients is tell us the truth, disclose everything. So that now, okay, there's this issue that you had in the UK. The regulator here in Kenya maybe knows about it, so how do we approach it? We will disclose and say, okay, we had this issue, we were penalized X amount of pounds, and it is no longer there, it is no longer hanging. You see, when you approach the regulator with your honesty, it will be easier for them. You start on a clean slate, despite your past, can I call them misgiving? So I don't think it should worry anyone trying to come into some of the jurisdictions in Africa. And I mean, it's easier that way, just being honest from the word go.
It's so true. It's like I work with regulators a lot,
Yes.
and this is fear. There's like, oh my God, the regulator is bad. Actually, that's rubbish. The regulator wants the industry to grow. Their revenue grows, the economy grows. And I have yet to come across a regulator who won't sit down with an operator and say, right, the operator says, okay, I want to do this. Help me figure out how to do it legally. Help me figure out how to do it with a local partner. And yet there is a fear, an unnecessary and unwarranted fear of the regulators, whereas I think that's something that would be great to be eliminated, because if you are looking to bring in third-party, I say third-party, external companies, as Joseph said, there's a huge interest in companies coming in. I mean, that's why we're sitting here. There's massive interest. The spotlight is on Africa. The market is recognized as being huge. But you need local partners, you need to know. And, and then you take, say, Bet365 has one license across the board, but they can't operate, for example, in Kenya yet, because they can't get the M-Pesa, and, without the license, they can't get M-Pesa certified, and without that, they really don't have a thing in the market. So it's, how do you think we can get around that?
So what we've advised our clients is also, apart from, even before going to the board, for example, or the regulator, we've advised them to even use their commercial attaches or trade attaches in the various jurisdictions. So you go to them and tell them, we want to invest in this industry. So there are individuals whose sole purpose is to facilitate trade between the foreign country and the host. So it is from there that now the lever now go from the embassy or the High Commission to now the board. So at the moment you formalize this, you're able to get even the right partners, and you'll get to know the right lawyers like myself, and other, yes, and even people who, like at Safaricom, you'll be told there's this gentleman at Safaricom who does ABCD, and it's formal, and it's all formal. So this fear that was there a few years ago, even in Uganda, whereby you could hear that you need to know this big person is related to the president's son and all those things. Right now, we're able to fly into Uganda, go to the board, tell them that these are our issues, this is what we want, and you're assisted. So I'm happy that the regulators, even in Tanzania, the regulators have continued to demystify that there's something about this board, that there's a higher being that you have to go to and kneel and kiss the ring before you get a license. I have come to learn that it's all a farce. You just go and as you said, the regulators are willing to listen. And if you are serious, you will get your license.
Yeah, like good actors, no matter who they are, will get good local partners, work with the regulators, and there'll be business. But what you've just said there, that's, in the last 30 seconds or the last minute, I've learned more than I have done in the last 5 years about how to look at Africa and how an external company with a license needs to come through. They need to find you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
We've spoken about the positives, but now let's talk a bit about the negatives as well. So what are the main difficulties being faced by operators entering the market? So we mentioned a little bit fragmentation, yes. But what advice do you give operators trying to enter the various African markets? And then we can also look into some specific markets as well later on. But for the time being, let's take it more generally. So what are the main difficulties?
So here the assumption is that you already have your license. So some of the challenges have been, number one, you failed to do proper market research and maybe did only desktop research. Some of the clients who've gotten the market right have actually gone to the market. They've gone to local pubs, they've gone to the slums. So with this research, they've gotten the product right. They've been able to localize in terms of advertising. So this way, they know how to attract the right clientele. And then once they get the right clientele, the other issue would be now compliance. Okay, you've made this much, but you're not remitting your taxes. For sure, the regulator and the taxman will be on your neck. So we encourage our clients to always be compliant. Where it's not clear, just ask. Go to the regulators, find out what we are having this issue, how can you help us? And also formalize it, write to them so that in case you have issues, you'll say, guys, we came to you and this is what you advised us. So that's what I'd advise. So I've said about localization, compliance, and the other bit that I've also seen being a challenge, that once you get your license, there's some bits that some of the clients forget to do in terms of securing the intellectual property rights, whereby you come here and you find that someone has already registered a domain, let's say trademarkbetting.co.ke, yet it's what you've used for the past 50 years in America or Europe. So these are some of the things. So we have a checklist that we always give our clients that prior to launching, we need to ensure that you've secured the domains, you've started registration of the trademarks, that's the reservation of the trademarks and what have you. And I think more often than not, they've been okay in terms of, you can never be 100% right in this industry because there's always be, which is another challenge, there'll always be a new law, a new regulation or new requirement coming up. And I'll still go back to what the board did last year on a light note, whereby during renewal, we had to go to 8 regulators to get clearance. So that was not there before. So you have to be prepared and have thick skin when you're operating in these markets.
One thing, and
Arnold, but if I may, what about ancillary services? So how difficult is it to find payment providers? How difficult is it to find banking in Africa? How difficult is it to move money in and out of Africa? Are these challenges that are being faced by operators at the moment?
I will not lie. Yes, there are challenges that are being faced by operators, and that's why we've been trying to encourage various operators to at least be united in the various associations as operators, and this way they're able to approach the regulators to go around some of these issues, especially like moving money out of the country. The constant problems about payment solutions. So what we have done is that we, for example, when it comes to banks, we have earmarked the banks that are willing to open bank accounts for betting companies. But as we have done that, of course, the banks, especially right now, their due diligence is not to joke with. It will even take you 2 months to open a bank account because they know if they are to be found guilty of money laundering, then they risk fines and even losing their licenses. So we've earmarked some of these ancillary service providers. For example, bulk SMS providers, we know the top 3 payment solutions. They are companies that we have worked with and that we always recommend to our clients. So the fact that we constantly engage as an industry, we will always find the right people. And part of the solution, as I've said, I'll reiterate, is the industry now coming together as one, so that they're able to solve some of these challenges as operators.
Yeah, because that was something I was going to ask. Is because it's something that I think a lot of entities outside of, it's like if they come work with a local partner, set up, it's like how do they get their share of the profits back to their domicile? So because moving money out of territories, especially out of continents, isn't always simple. People are having the exact same issue with US partners. It's like they're struggling to get their US profits back to their own headquarters, be they in Sweden or in or in the UK or wherever. It's like getting the money out, I think, is certainly something, it has to be a consideration. As as Joseph said, it's like that's one of the one of the big, not negatives, but one of the big considerations. It is in the US, it is in LATAM, and it's the same here.
Of course, there's always, of course, both of them are legal, but there's been a lot of, over the past few years, I've read about people who are called tax arrangers, who are not loved by many people, but these advisors will tell you the best way to structure, even from the word go, how to structure your company, and how you're even able to now move your money without having problems with the authorities.
Right.
So that one is a bit detailed. Perhaps that one it's a discussion you can have. There are solutions.
Good money, honest money. It's
honest money.
Procedures.
There are legitimate ways to go about it. But before even getting to the legitimate ways to go about it rather, there's a way you can structure your agreements, and even from the point of incorporation and the agreements between shareholders. And even the structure of incorporation. Do we have a corporate entity and what have you? That works, that is above board.
Yeah.
So that one is there in some of the jurisdictions that we have worked with. Countries like Ethiopia, of course, there's been that challenge of moving money from Ethiopia to other jurisdictions. So that one, for now, I'm yet to see a perfect solution, but I know there are people who are doing it. And they're still operational.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, these are all things. It's like like we've been saying for the last few hours. Yeah. It's like there's an awareness that there is need for solutions, and there's a willingness to find them. It's just getting there.
Yeah, and one of the solutions that we're even discussing with my friends and my colleagues in Uganda, as we're saying, there's this union called the East African Community that is still growing, where we have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, now DRC. And the fact that all of us are so invested in the industry, it is not impossible to come up with the same way the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement came up with the proposal of the purpose of it. The objective of it is to be able to move goods and services freely across states. Yeah. Now, before we go to the AU, and that's why they even developed a protocol on cyber security and personal data protection. We can start with the EAC, and I mean it will take a lot of time, and start conversations whereby we are saying, okay, we have this many online betting companies. They are remitting this much money in terms of taxes, and even East Africa, some the East African countries were being used as an example in Nigeria.
Right.
So last year in Nigeria, the World Bank recommended to Nigeria to impose an 8% tax on stakes because of the impact that it has had in East Africa, and specifically Kenya. Of course, I had a problem with that because that was not evidence-based. It was not proportionate, but that's a discussion. We'll have that discussion later. But then, if the East African community can develop a protocol in terms of regulating online gambling companies, whereby now we know that if we're operating in Kenya, it will be easier for me to even start my operations in Uganda. And this is how easy it is. In Uganda, for example, a Kenyan or a Kenyan company is treated as a local. So I'm not treated as a foreigner. So that alone is an ease of doing business. So that tells me that if we have more of these forms of cooperation, then it is easier for companies to now start setting up in East Africa before now going to other regions. So that's one of the solutions that I would propose. Yes. And it's not impossible. It's been done.
Yeah.
It's being done in Europe. There are gambling standards in
Yes,
Europe.
yeah.
So what stops us from doing it here in Africa?
Yeah, and I like the lady at the back. I didn't catch her name, but like she was saying, it's a form of gaming standards across everything, and there is even though the domestic legislations in Europe and the domestic legislations in all of the 50 states are all significantly different, there's a base that's the same, and there's a base that runs through them all.
Yeah, I mean, you did it even with the EU GDPR. So there's the
don't
European.
Talk to me about that.
But
It's like
it's a perfect example of how this isn't. It's actually it isn't the way of doing business.
Yeah.
If you know that there's this overarching regulation that now guides the various jurisdictions.
Yeah.
So I would advocate for this.
No, the reason I said don't talk to me is because I have had to wade through that legislation, and I swear to God, it's not a good bedtime read. But it is, the thing about that, and it makes it complex but very effective, is that it applies not just to countries in the EU, but also to countries outside of the EU that are taking EU business, that are processing data from the EU. And I think that's something, and again, we were talking about the holistic view earlier about the customers, and these are all major considerations, but they take a while to come into force. But it sounds like there's a lot of effort being done and a lot of thought. It's like, I look at some countries and they just, they don't look, and I know there's a session on this later, they just start over. It's like, okay, it's like as if nobody's done this before, let's start again. Whereas it's like, from what you're saying here and from what I've heard, it's like there's a lot of elements of like, okay, if we're regulating this, there have been many countries and many jurisdictions that have gone before and learned the lessons. Let's not relearn them.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no need to reinvent the wheel at times, but then also it's the same. I'll still make reference. Let's make reference to the EU GDPR. Even countries in Africa are copy pasting the EU GDPR as it were. And it's not necessarily tailor-made to the problems that country is facing. So even for gaming, for example, I know the UK gambling bill collapsed.
Collapsed, imploded, is on hold, who knows?
So you can imagine that it will be a folly of an African country to now copy-paste that which was being proposed, which has not even been passed, and it's not practical. So I always advocate for evidence-based decisions and regulations that are not just evidence-based, but even proportionate.
Yeah.
So Arnold, we have to conclude soon. We have just 1 minute, but before doing so, I'd like you to mention 3 countries, not the obvious ones, not South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, or Ghana. Mention me 3 countries, 3 jurisdictions in Africa where you believe operators should invest in.
I'll allow me to mention two that come to mind, top of mind. I'll still look at Ethiopia and DRC. Ethiopia is slowly being liberalized. For example, Safaricom are now there. They have a license for both M-Pesa and the telecom bit. DRC is also opening up. Our biggest bank here locally, Equity Bank, has already invested about $10 million, and they are slowly growing. We need to look at also their population rather of the two countries, and we look at where Kenya was in 2015 and how the industry has grown. So I would say that that's where they are currently, and investors just need to be patient. Of course, there's the issue of the fact that you need to be a local to invest in Ethiopia. 100%. The betting companies in Ethiopia have to be owned 100% by locals. So, and I know there are discussions about lifting that investment directive. I think it was a 2021 investment directive, not actually 2021. I'd encourage my clients to look at those two.
Okay, so we just saw there we've the Zoom connection with Joseph has dropped off, but Joseph is with WH Partners in Malta, and I work with him a lot, and he's a great guy. So get in touch if you want. I'm sure his email will be around. But any questions to the amazing Arnold? No, I think that's good. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Arnold.